Recently, I created a video about the hardest games for every Nintendo console and found it was a great way to showcase a few titles that more casual gamers may have never heard about. This led me to coming up with a similar video idea, but this time focusing on another topic, now looking at the weirdest games for every Nintendo console. Here, I will go over what I think are some of the strangest titles from each console, which will contain some of the oddest gameplay, outlandish storytelling, and funky mechanics. I'm also only going to be looking at games that are licensed by Nintendo, so fan-made games or unofficial releases won't be found here. Oh yeah, and before I get started, my name is Copycat, and if you haven't yet, then please subscribe to my channel, and hit that bell button to stay notified when I upload new videos. The very first home console in the company's history was the Nintendo Entertainment System, or Famicom as it was known as in Japan, which was released worldwide in the mid-1980s. Games made during this time period were really interesting, as they were either extremely simplistic with easy-to-understand mechanics, or were overly difficult with strange mechanics and very confusing storyline elements. The latter is perfectly exemplified in the first game we're going to talk about in this video, called Takeshis Challenge. Developed by the Taito Corporation and released only in Japan in December of 1996, this is known to be the first ever game where a celebrity, Takeshi Kitano, actually had direct input in a game's design and plot. The original idea was to create a game based on his TV show called Takeshi's Castle, which some of you who are a bit older in the audience might recognize as the hilarious North American redub reskin called Most Extreme Elimination Challenge. But instead, during one drunken meeting, the developers and him agreed to create a completely different type of game. Now, to say this title's weird is a complete understatement, as you play as an average salaryman where some of the gameplay elements include quitting your job, divorcing your wife, singing karaoke, getting blackout drunk, stealing an old man's map then beating him up, while fighting off the Yakuza members while all trying to get to a small island to find the hidden treasure. What's even weirder is that this game was directly marketed towards young children, which actually is really strange as it's one of the most adult games on the system itself. Takeshi's Challenge even went as far as inspiring the Grand Theft Auto franchise, as this title is one of the first that allows you to attack literally anyone, no matter good or bad, and included elements of drinking and gambling. Even to this day, this game garners incredibly mixed reviews, with some referring to it as one of the worst games of all time, and others praising it for thinking outside the box, but either way there's no denying that it's extremely weird. Nintendo's next console was also their first portable one, which was the Game Boy that was released in Japan in April of 1989. A game from this system that I have to talk about is one that actually had been ported from the Atari ST called Faceball 2000. Known as one of the earliest first-person shooters ever, players control a smiley face emoji, guiding it through a maze, shooting and eliminating all enemies that get in your way. At the time, pushing gameplay like this on a portable system was seen as revolutionary, where people today can agree that a game like this feels way too simplistic and just strange. The only other Game Boy title I could find that was worthy to be showcased in this video is mainly weird due to its goal and name in Monkey Puncher. Made by the Taito Corporation, who was also responsible for the creation of Takeshi's Challenge, this game has the objective of training a monkey in organized boxing matches so you can save the main character's father and sibling. Now, if you thought from its title it'd be a fighting game, then you'd be sorely mistaken, as it plays more like a Tamagotchi where you have to befriend, feed, and train the monkey where the only thing in your control is to boost its stats. During the fight sequences, you really have no influence at all, which as a kid playing this would have frustrated me to no end. The Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or Super Famicom as it's known as in Japan, was the company's second home console, which was released in the early 1990s. This system had massive support from third-party developers and allowed for much larger, fleshed-out games, which led to a large amount of strange titles. One that really stands out to me is a game called Mega Man Soccer, released by Capcom in 1994. Now, this game is not overtly weird, as other franchises have used their titular character in sports-themed games. It just seems strange in this case, as Mega Man never really came across to me as that type of character. The gameplay feels very stiff for a soccer game, and was released to extremely mixed reviews, with most critics at the time saying it was entertaining but unnecessary. Now, if we're going to say the words weird and unnecessary in the same breath, then I definitely have to talk about Home Improvement Power Tool Pursuit, which was developed by Imagineering and released on the SNES in November of 1994. This wasn't the first video game based on another piece of media, and it definitely wouldn't be the last. But in all honesty, there are games based off of movies and TV shows that end up being great. It's just Home Improvement didn't seem like that series needed this same treatment. This platforming, run-and-gun style of game has you playing as Tim the Toolman Taylor, using power tools to defeat strange enemies like dinosaurs, acid-spitting mummies, robots, and ghosts. Oh yeah, and if you get stuck, don't even bother reading the game's manual, as real men don't need instructions. Yeah, right. The home console jump from the SNES to the Nintendo 64, released towards the end of 1996, was enormous, as the upgraded technology allowed for three-dimensional games, which at the time was revolutionary, allowing companies to produce some amazing titles. Absolute classics like Super Mario 64, GoldenEye 007, Star Fox 64, and The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time perfectly exemplified these updated graphics and mechanics, really showing off what the future of video gaming was gonna look like. However, not every single developer had a grasp on what made a great 3D game, and one called Titus Studios ended up coming out with one of the worst, weirdest, and downright embarrassing experiences on the N64 called Superman 64. The gameplay is a lot less about beating up bad guys and a lot more about flying through a maze of rings, which is very hard to begin with, as controlling Superman feels very clunky. If you do manage to pass this incredibly difficult section, there are really only two other types of missions: carrying an object from point A to point B, or fighting a boss, which is so extremely easy it comes across as a bit of a joke. When a company releases a game in a state like this, it becomes pretty clear that they only cared about making a deadline and making money for the game's release, and didn't really care about actually creating a good title. Another really weird game I came across that I just had to mention briefly is one called Golden Nugget 64, which was developed by Westwood Studios, an EA subsidiary, in 1998. This game is essentially a casino simulator where you as the player have the choice between several classic gambling games. It's pretty clear this game was only made to teach and prepare kids to gamble in real life, which makes things even funnier with the fact that it's made by EA. The next system in Nintendo's history is also their second handheld console, which is the Game Boy Advance. Released in North America in the summer of 2001, the system's capabilities were very comparable to the Super Nintendo, and that definitely showed, as many of the Mario titles were ports from that console. When I was researching weird games for the Game Boy Advance, there was one that instantly stood out to me called Boktai: The Sun Is in Your Hand. Now, it's not the gameplay that's strange in this title, as it's a pretty cool action-adventure RPG, but it's actually the game's cartridge, which is really the head-turning feature. Built into the cartridge is a photometric light sensor, meaning that it measures the amount of light exposure around it. In order to charge the weapons you obtain in the game, you actually have to take your Game Boy Advance outside during the daytime. If you play at night and run out of charge on your weapons, then you have to avoid all combat with enemies, which to be honest is just bizarre. Now, I get this is one way to get kids to go outside, but honestly it comes across as a bit gimmicky and kind of unnecessary. Nintendo's next home console was the GameCube, which sported incredible graphics for the time of its release, a few months after the Game Boy Advance, in November of 2001. Right off the bat, a game I have to talk about is one called Darkened Sky, which is actually really weird as it contains one of the most egregious product placements of all time. Developed by a studio called Boston Animation, which only ever created 4 games, Darkened Sky is a third-person action-adventure game where a young woman sets off in a fantasy realm in search for her lost mother. Now, on paper that sounds like it could be a good game, but it's when magic is introduced to the gameplay when things start to get really strange. That's because to use this magic, you need to have Skittles. Yes, the candy. This sort of product placement makes almost no sense in a fantasy game like this one, and sort of cheapens the feeling of the world knowing it's just an interactive piece of advertising. Even the publisher had second doubts and thought the same thing, and at the last second tried to remove all Skittle references from the game, but it was too late. They instead decided to remove all references to Skittles in the game's box art, which makes the inception of this product placement even that much stranger. The Nintendo DS, which of course stands for dual screen because of the two screens, was the company's third handheld device, which was released in time for Christmas in 2004. The addition of the secondary touchscreen allowed for unique gameplay experiences that at the time was seen as revolutionary. Of course, now almost everyone has a touchscreen phone or iPad, but that's neither here or there. The weird game that I decided to show you all for the DS is a Pokemon title, but one that I actually wasn't familiar with at all. That game is Pokemon Conquest, which was developed by Tecmo Koei, released extremely late in the system's history in the summer of 2012. Now, in Japan, the game is known as Pokemon plus Nobunaga's Ambition, where Nobunaga's Ambition is an older Japanese RPG turn-based style series about samurais in feudal Japan. Combining these seemingly unrelated series does come across as a bit strange, even if this game was met with relatively positive reviews due to its replayability and ability to mix Pokemon with a historical Japanese setting. The gameplay is relatively simple, in terms of turn-based strategy games, but there is a weird mechanic of befriending Pokemon, instead of capturing them, where you have to engage in a Dance Dance Revolution-like minigame, pressing buttons in coordination with what's being displayed on the screen. Some of you may not think this game is as weird as I do, but I still find it bizarre when Pokemon appear in a spin-off game outside of the main series, especially one that's set in feudal Japan. Now, a title that almost everyone will agree is incredibly unnecessary and weird is Sommelier DS, released by EA only in Japan in 2007. Now, honestly, I couldn't even find a description for this game in English online anywhere, but from what I can gather, it's basically just a digital wine tasting guide where you can review the wines you decide to taste to remember what you like and dislike. In the age of instant information in the palm of your hand, this game seems really puzzling, especially compounded with the fact that Nintendo's target audience is children who aren't old enough to drink. Nintendo's most successful selling console, the Wii, is the next system we're going to look at in this video, which was released just before Christmas in 2006. Here, the Wii Remote Controller was introduced, which allowed developers to create different types of motion-controlled based games that would usually only be possible in arcade-like settings. Now, this even evolved to the point where Konami, of all companies, decided to port an arcade shooter called Target Terror to the Wii in 2008. Now, you've probably come across a game like this in your local arcade that uses real-life character models as the in-game enemies. That's always worked well in a setting like that, as you're just there to play a fun but gimmicky shoot-'em-up. Once it gets translated into a home console setting, it just doesn't feel the same, and looks like a lazy attempt at trying to take advantage and cash in on a new technology. As you could imagine, the reviews for this game aren't great, with the main critiques being its difficulty, and of course, its graphics. Nintendo's next system was a handheld one called the 3DS that offered considerably upgraded graphics from the previous DS, and of course, as the name entails, was equipped with a revolutionary 3-dimensional screen. Now, this didn't change the gameplay in any way, and just added a cool effect that you could toggle on and off. A game that instantly sticks out from all the titles that I've scoured through on the system is one called Tokyo Crash Mobs. Developed by Mitchell Corp and Nintendo, this puzzle game actually uses real-life people during its cutscenes and gameplay, which result in a very odd-looking experience. The objective of the game is also very weird, as you have to complete strange puzzles to further the two characters' journeys to try to reach Tokyo. There are plenty of things that get in your way, like a very long line, ninjas, and even a UFO. I think if the game used normal animation methods, it would just seem a bit more tame, as there's just something very unusual and bizarre about picking up and throwing someone at a crowd of people. I guess lines must be a big problem in Japan to base an entire game around them. I don't really know. Nintendo's next console was the Wii U, which was released in North America in November of 2012. Now, this system is widely known as one of Nintendo's biggest failures, as they oddly decided to name it way too similar to its predecessor, which confused many people with whether or not it was a new system or just an add-on. Where the Wii sold over 100 million units, the Wii U sold a measly 13 million units worldwide, meaning it was a colossal failure for the company and resulted in the hardware having a very short lifespan. Now, I saw a lot of people talk about the Wonderful 101 as one of the weirdest games on this console, but I feel like it falls more under the unique category, and is really just one of the most underrated games that had the misfortune of being released on an unpopular system. Instead, a game I saw a lot of people talk about online is one called Tokyo Mirage Sessions, which is actually one of the weirdest titles on the system. This is mainly due to the fact that it's technically a Shin Megami Tensei and Fire Emblem crossover, but set in modern-day Japan, which is incredibly out of place for both franchises. The game follows the members of a talent agency who have to fight off hostile entities from another dimension called Mirages. However, there are also friendly Mirages who appear in the form of members of the Fire Emblem series that you, as the player, have to work alongside with between dimensions to battle these evil enemies. Like both series, the combat is turn-based where your party members have clearly defined strengths and weaknesses, meaning swapping out certain members during certain situations is key. In all honesty, a title like Game & Wario may seem weirder, but there's just something about seeing these two popular franchises mashed together that it feels strange. Nintendo's most recent and highly successful console is the Switch, which was released worldwide in March of 2017. One of the launch titles released alongside the console is a very strange game made by Nintendo EPD titled 1-2 Switch. This party game was created to showcase the Joy-Con's capabilities in terms of HD rumble, motion camera controls, and audio cues that all become the basis for each minigame. Now, at the time, this seemed like a great idea for Nintendo to showcase how the Joy-Cons and Switch games in the future could work, but instead of making it a free edition a la Nintendo Land, they decided to release it oddly as a standalone full-price game, which was a decision that really didn't sit well with many fans. Most people who bought the game, including myself, just felt like it was way too bare bones, as it seemed much more like a tech demo than a full game. On top of all that, many reviewers agreed that there's definitely a bit of adult innuendo going on throughout a few specific minigames. I mean, just kinda take a look.
Milk. Ball count. Soda shake.
Alright, so that's gonna be it for today's video, guys. I really hope you did enjoy this one. If you did, please leave a like. Comment below what you thought about it, and if you have any other ideas for future videos, and of course subscribe to my channel. Also, if you haven't yet, please check out my Instagram at Copycat Gamer and give it a follow. There I upload some cool clips and items from my collection that you won't see anywhere else. Hope you guys all have a good day, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.